You're in a meeting watching a project slide toward a total collapse. You see the fix, and you know exactly who to call. Instead, you keep your head down and resolve to just handle it yourself. For you, reaching out doesn't feel like a shortcut. It registers as a personal failure, a sign that you aren't capable of managing the complexity on your own. So you take on the extra work in silence. Cultural critics spend a massive amount of time analyzing the labels of other generations, the economic legacy of the boomers, the digital habits of millennials, the social anxieties of Gen Z. But the Gen X woman usually gets skipped. She is the person managing a full-time career, tracking a household budget, and checking on her aging parents before the sun is even up. She rarely complains, and she never seeks public validation for the weight she carries. This intense independence is the lingering result of a survival strategy established in childhood, a specific map for navigating a world where help was never part of the equation. By the mid-1980s, roughly 7 million children between the ages of 5 and 13 were returning to empty houses every afternoon. They were the latchkey kids, letting themselves in with keys worn around their necks and managing their own time until evening. For young girls, that solitude came with an unspoken requirement to maintain order. The expectation was that by the time a parent returned, the dishes would be done, younger siblings would be fed, and the household running smoothly. These girls grew up in what psychologists call a high-contingency environment. In these settings, a child's choices lead directly to consequences, without a parent nearby to intercept a mistake or soften the blow. This environment trains a developing brain to constantly scan the horizon, projecting future scenarios and identifying every potential problem before it can actually manifest. When help is physically absent during those formative years, the brain eventually stops considering asking for assistance as a viable solution. The option simply disappears from the mental menu. This hyper-independence is a survival calculation made by a 10-year-old who had no one to call. Decades later, that same calculation is still running. As these women entered the workforce, they were told they could have it all: the career, the family, and the personal life, all running at maximum capacity. But the social infrastructure to support that promise never arrived. There was no affordable childcare and no meaningful paid leave. If a woman struggled to manage the dual workload, it was framed as a personal lack of organization rather than a systemic failure. Institutional loyalty also began to vanish. They watched their fathers lose jobs after 30 years of service to companies that chose the bottom line over people. At the same time, they watched the promise of a lifelong marriage dissolve in their own living rooms as divorce rates reached record highs. They saw that even the most personal contracts could be broken. This history created a mental posture of defensive pessimism. It is a form of pattern recognition. You hope for the best, but you ensure you have a financial backup and a solo plan because you've seen the adults in the room get it wrong. Because institutions and relationships proved fragile, these women concluded that personal competence was the only asset they could truly rely on. Today, that workload has expanded. These women have become the sandwich generation, pressed between the needs of two different eras of life. They are raising teenagers while simultaneously managing the doctor's appointments and daily care for aging parents whose health is beginning to decline. Holding these two worlds together requires massive effort. They track medication schedules, school conflicts, and the emotional well-being of everyone around them while maintaining a high-level career. In this environment, her own needs sit permanently at the bottom of the schedule, an overflow category she never reaches. Even when the load becomes objectively too heavy for one person, the childhood habit of self-reliance remains. Reaching out for help still feels like a dangerous admission of weakness. Real vulnerability feels like exposure. To admit she can't do it alone is to hand over evidence that she isn't as capable as her survival requires her to be. If you feel exhausted, it isn't because you are failing to manage. It is because you are carrying the weight of a lifelong strategy that was never designed for a burden this large. Understanding this history is the first step toward finally letting someone else take a turn.